Right, this is an introduction to energy system training. Energy system training overall, right? Because I want you to pull out all the basic principles of energy system training so that we could use that as a base support going into seeing how this plays out for the ear rower, okay? So we have a power time curve set up here. Just to visualize, this is 0 seconds, this is a few seconds, you know, we're into 1 to 3 minutes, and now just think of that as like 60 minutes, okay? Just to stretch it out. So this is a time curve, and this is just a measurement of power. And it's only there to help you explain what you're going to see in language to come up for training the ear rower. Gain pretty much means alactic activity. So the way you want to describe it is, it's the starting point, remember, a couple of seconds of an expressed energy. So when you do gain, you're basically, just think of it from a stable position and just creating as much energy in the shortest period of time, okay? So think of concepts of just revving up really hot and then stopping and slowing down, okay? Do you see that? Even the movement that I was doing there is only a couple of seconds. And that requires a really bright, like really intense short effort, which should require longer rest periods if it's expressed effectively, okay? Now the difference in this you could see only on the graph. Look at the power differential between doing gain, which is really bright, super hard, and pain, it's kind of less, right? It's less than. So when you try to extend a good amount of power out to the right, what's called out to the right on the power time curve, and you get into this 30-second, 60-second, 90-second, 2-minute area, right, where you're trying to push this power out, you can see the massive differential that there is in power, let's say from 30 seconds up to 2 minutes. Look at that. That's a massive differential in power, right? You see that? Right? Now, the reason for that is that's why we call this the weird middle zone. It's really hard to kind of pace out that really hard, unsustainable activity. So the way I'm describing that is not this stored energy, you're at rest, and you just go, guns a-blazing. You know going into it that you're trying to extend this out as long as possible, and then it just can't continue, right? So that's what we call pain, quote unquote, lactic activity, which I'll come back to describing. So gain is a release of that stored energy and getting rid of all of it. Pain is this higher power, higher relative to aerobic activity, that you're trying to sustain for as long as possible. But there comes a point in time where there's an end point to it, right, where you see the power dropping tremendously, but that should give you an indication as to how you know if you're doing it effectively. The same thing is involved here. It's a longer rest period, right? It's not similar to the work that was done. It's a longer rest period, not as long, ironically, as relative to gain, but it's a longer rest period because you can see I didn't waste as many resources if I did something powerful here as relation to wasting these resources, as an example, okay? So gain, you're going from a stored position to a big expression, short period of time. Pain, it's a little longer in time for the work you're doing, but it should get to the point where you're just like, and I'm dropping power. So I'm just describing pain that way. Now the other side of the continuum of gain is sustain. So sustain in practice, you saw my time frames there, let's say 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, right? You can see the further and further it gets out, there's this very small differential in power. So the question should remain, why is there such a small difference between here and here? Is because all of that work is very low intense, right? And the main limitation that's involved on the back end of our limitation talk is mechanical issues. That's generally what occurs, that people can't, for example, when people go walking, the reason why someone can't just start walking and then they can't walk for 3 hours straight is mechanically their ankles can't handle it. Do you see that? So it's a mechanical limitation. It's not an aerobic limitation. It's a mechanical limitation. But if you were to compare their 1 hour walking pace to a 3 hour walking pace after lots of practice, there's barely any difference in that. Okay? So sustain basically means, so I can describe it, it's like in music, it's like this. What is that, Farajaka? I'm not even sure. It's keeping steady, going for a long period of time, monotone, patient, repetitive, rhythm. Do you see the difference in that as opposed to gain? Gain is like, ah! Pain is, right? Drop. And then sustain is, right? So describing that so you can get a feel for it will allow you to capture what you're trying to do in each of these GPSs that we talk about going forward for doing the air rower gain, the air rower pain, and then the air rower sustain. And then we'll get into some discussion around mixed modal sustain and mixed modal pain. Just in classification of what these mean in a physiological sense, you can kind of, capture, the fuel usage and maybe exactly what are the resources you need to go into each one. I call gain, in classic definition, alactic. So that means without lactate. It doesn't necessarily mean you will not have some production of it when you do it, but it just goes to show you that that's not the real intention, right? The intention of doing gain, again, is just to release stored energy, okay? Now, pain, you can see, it starts with L, it's lactic. That means it's probably in the presence of an eliciting some form of lactate response. So some of that pain, some of the tingling sensation, really heavy breathing after the activity, just yuckiness, right? That hurts a whole lot more for that period of time. Yeah, that's called lactic, in the presence of lactate. So we may experience that more so through this. Now, the difference in that, this one is specifically in aerobic. Aerobic means sustainable. That means there'll be hardly any presence of an elicited lactate response whatsoever when you do sustain. So when we call it sustain, we mean it's truly oxidative, truly aerobic setting, okay? So that's an introduction, a brief one, and I hope you can pull some principles from gain, pain, sustain in regards to the power time curve. So when we classify it, it actually, is like this. This is gain inside of the opportunity for pain, inside an opportunity for sustain. And then when we get into training these variables, you'll see that they all work together, but you can focus on each one specifically relative to what you're capable of.